Hello bedtime explorer, tonight we travel far, across scorching dunes and whispering winds, to an empire built not on stone or steel, but on gold dust and stories. Mali. Yes, that Mali. Not the modern one you can fly to, but an ancient sprawl of shimmering wealth, camel caravans, and libraries larger than castles. You're standing at the edge of the Sahara now, sand between your toes, the air thick with heat and mystery. There are no maps yet. Just stars, traders, and rumors of a king whose riches were so ridiculous, he once crashed an entire economy just by showing up. And that king, your king, is coming. You probably won't survive this, by the way. The desert's not famous for its hospitality. Between the sunburns, the sandstorms, and the occasional camel sneezing in your face, there's a very real chance you'll collapse dramatically before you even get to the gold part. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you listening from? Drop your country and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who's traveling through history with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born into sand, sweat, and stories. Mali, around the year 1280, is an empire already stretching its fingers across West Africa like a sleepy giant just starting to wake. Trade routes thread through the land like veins, pulsing with salt, ivory, and, most famously, gold. Gold that glitters in riverbeds. Gold that hangs from the ears of nobles. Gold that isn't special here, because everyone has some. Including you. You're not the king yet. Not even close. You're a prince, technically. But not the heir. That role belongs to your older brother, a man with adventurous eyebrows and a tendency to get ideas. You, on the other hand, are expected to learn courtly manners, nod wisely during council meetings, and avoid stepping in camel dung during parades. It's a glamorous life. You grow up in Niani, Mali's capital, which isn't a glittering city of marble, sorry. It's a low-slung network of mud brick buildings, shaded courtyards, and loud markets where goats outnumber opinions. Still, it hums with purpose. Merchants roll in from the north, their faces wrapped in turbans, their donkeys laden with salt slabs. Scholars debate under baobab trees. You eat millet porridge for the 50th time this week. Such is royalty. But you sense something. A kind of swelling. The empire is full of gold but missing something else, direction, perhaps. A spine. Mali needs someone with vision, with nerve, with absurd levels of confidence. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is you. As you come of age, Mali itself seems to shift. There are tensions along the borders. Rival tribes testing the edges. Merchants complaining about bandits. Somewhere in the royal palace, someone's goat keeps escaping and eating official scrolls. Everything feels unfinished. Your brother, bless him, is not one for finishing things. One day, he announces that he's planning to sail across the Atlantic Ocean to discover what's on the other side. Yes. The whole ocean. Historians still argue whether this was sheer curiosity, divine inspiration, or just a really dramatic midlife crisis. He outfits an enormous fleet. Some say 200 boats. Others claim it was over 2,000. One ship is filled with provisions. The next with sailors. The third is just for cats, possibly. No one knows. You wave goodbye. He waves back. And then, he never comes back. Just sails off the page of history. Poof. This is not a great moment for Mali. The court panics. Who's in charge? The merchants raise eyebrows. The soldiers wait for orders. The nobles sniff for blood. And then someone remembers, you. The prince with decent posture and better than average cheekbones. So they crown you, Musa. Mansa Musa. You don't inherit a broken empire, but you do inherit a nervous one. It's big, yes, larger than most European kingdoms of the time. But it's also fragile. Run on alliances, whispers, and the ever-fickle loyalty of desert traders. You sit on the throne, literally a carved wood and gold seat, not that comfy, and the room tilts. You feel the weight of history. Also, your ceremonial robe is itchy. And then comes your first royal duty, don't ruin everything. You start small. Visit local chieftains. Settle disputes over water rights. Smile politely at elders who remember the good old days. But you're thinking bigger. Always bigger. Mali, after all, has the gold. Why not build something worthy of it? You ride out to the edges of the empire. To the gold mines of Bambuk and Bure, where men dig shimmering dust from the earth with nothing but iron tools and stubbornness. You speak to the miners. Ask what they need. You listen to rumors of tunnels haunted by snake spirits, of wells that turn red on full moons, of rival kingdoms sniffing at Mali's borders like hungry dogs. And slowly, you begin to see it. Mali isn't just a collection of riches. You just need the right ink, the right voice, the right flair. Oh, and maybe a pilgrimage to Mecca. But we'll get to that later. For now, you sit in your palace at Niani. Night falls. The heat settles. You're wrapped in cotton, gold bangles on your wrists, 1,000 plans curling behind your eyes like smoke. You are Mansa Musa. And the world has absolutely no idea what's coming. The crown settles on your head with barely a whisper, but its weight feels like an entire caravan of camels just parked themselves across your shoulders. You're not merely a king now, you're a Mansa. A divine ruler. A steward of souls. Mali doesn't just expect you to govern, it expects you to sparkle, inspire, and somehow avoid getting poisoned at banquets. No pressure. Your first act as ruler is, well, survival. Mali may be wealthy, but it's also stretched thin. From the Atlantic coast to the Niger River bend, the empire is stitched together by trading towns, oaths, and regional leaders who are very polite to your face but keep a dagger in their robes. Figuratively. Mostly. Your advisors, bearded, sharp-eyed, and always vaguely judgmental, urge caution. But you've inherited more than just your brother's throne. You've inherited his mess. And that mess starts with him. See, your brother Abu Bakr too didn't simply vanish into the ocean like a dramatic sea turtle. He left behind doubts. Historians still argue whether he really sailed west with 1,000 ships or just slipped off on a glorified fishing trip. Some say he was chasing myths of lands across the Atlantic. Others think he was testing new trade routes or just bored. What everyone does agree on, he never came back. Which leaves you, standing in the empty throne room, nodding solemnly as the nobles mutter, "So, what now?" You don't claim to be a prophet. But you are practical. You waste no time declaring your rule official. You re-establish control over fractious provinces, remind local governors that yes, you're very much alive, and no, they cannot secede just because your brother went on an epic vacation. You even issue a few public proclamations that include phrases like "divinely chosen" and "descended from kings," just to drive the point home. Subtlety? Optional. Still, not everyone is thrilled. The Songhai to the east are eyeing your borders. The Mossi to the south are raiding caravans. And inside the court, let's just say not every noble is thrilled about a backup prince now wearing the crown. You learn quickly that court politics is less about governing and more about knowing who's secretly related to whom, who borrowed money from whom, and which cousin owns which salt mine. In between the politics, you make it a point to travel. Rulers who stay in palaces grow soft. You ride with caravans under the scorching sun, eat meals with village elders, even help settle the occasional goat-related land dispute. It builds trust. And also leg cramps. But here's the thing, you're not content with just managing the empire. You want to transform it. One evening, while seated beneath a flowering shade tree, you stare out across the river and think, Mali has gold. Mali has land. Mali has stories. But what it doesn't have, what it needs, is prestige. Real prestige. The kind that lasts longer than a generation and echoes far beyond the desert. And that's when the seed of a truly insane idea begins to sprout, a pilgrimage. Not just any pilgrimage, the pilgrimage. The Hajj. A sacred journey to Mecca, thousands of miles away. Through hostile territory. Across oceans of sand. With your entire entourage. You smile quietly. This isn't just about faith. It's about vision. Reputation. Legacy. Before you start building that legacy, though, you need to keep the economy humming. Which means gold. You ride out to Bambuk, one of Mali's richest gold-producing regions. It's less El Dorado and more sweat and dust with sparkles. Men work with crude tools under blistering sun, scooping sand, sieving rivers, following veins through rock. Gold here is less a luxury and more a lifestyle. You greet the miners, speak to their foreman, even help carry a basket or two just for the symbolism. The gesture doesn't go unnoticed. But beneath the gold is a problem no one wants to name: inflation. When there's too much gold, its value begins to wobble. It's like showing up to a party with 300 identical cakes, suddenly cake doesn't feel special anymore. You're aware of this. But for now, the mines hum. And Mali glitters. Back in Niani, your capital, you begin consolidating power. You form a standing army, not huge, but loyal. You reward your closest allies with land, titles, and the occasional slightly absurd robe covered in peacock feathers. You also begin quietly patronizing Islamic scholars and jurists. Mali is a Muslim empire in name, but outside the cities, faith is often blended with older local traditions. You don't force change. You invite it. Soft power, wrapped in silk and calligraphy. You start a correspondence with scholars in Cairo. You request architects from Andalusia. You commission poets. Mali will not just have culture. Mali will export it. Meanwhile, you find time for personal joys. You enjoy sweetened hibiscus drinks, slow walks through the market incognito. Your disguise is not great, and hunting trips where the gazelles always seem to escape at just the right moment, almost like they've read the script. And at night, you plan. You sketch routes through the desert. You calculate food, water, shelter. You assemble an entourage, not just soldiers, but musicians, cooks, translators, slaves, servants, and scholars. You dream of caravans stretching to the horizon, of cities trembling with anticipation, of gold falling like rain. Because you're not going to Mecca alone. You're taking half the empire with you. But first, you need the world to know who Mansa Musa is. Mud doesn't sound like the stuff of legends. But that's what your capital, Niani, is made of: earth, clay, and patience. And yet, when the morning sun hits just right, the smooth adobe walls glow golden, like they were built to trap the light itself. These aren't castles of stone or marble. They're courtyards shaded by woven mats, homes crowned with wooden support beams that poke out like a line of crooked teeth, and domed roofs to keep the heat from sinking into your skull. This is where you rule now. Not from a marble throne or a mountain fortress, but from a palace of mold, mud, and careful shade. And somehow, it works. You're Mansa Musa, ruler of Mali, and you're sitting in your not-so-humble compound, listening to the slow hum of business below. Somewhere in the courtyard, a merchant is loudly arguing with a tax collector over whether camels count as mobile inventory. Nearby, a woman is selling honeyed millet cakes to a group of off-duty guards. Children chase each other, shrieking and barefoot, dodging between the pillars like smoke. And above all this, you sit, high up on a terrace, where the breeze is a little cooler and the dates are always fresh. Your court is a strange blend of ancient Africa and global influence. There's a griot singing in the hallway about your grandfather's victories, while in the next room, a visiting scholar from the Maghreb grumbles about the lack of decent ink. You're trying to turn Niani into something more than just an administrative center. It must be a symbol, a beating heart of culture, wealth, and power. But for now, it's mostly a city of dust, dreams, and surprising tax loopholes. Running the empire isn't just about grandeur, it's also about bureaucracy. And your bureaucracy is creative. You have tax officials who calculate harvest yields based on goat behavior. You have scribes who copy legal documents in triplicate using imported paper from Egypt. You have a minister of irrigation whose idea of a canal is dig until water shows up and hope it doesn't flood. Still, things function. Just barely. You start reorganizing. You divide the empire into provinces and appoint governors, some loyal, some dangerous, most annoyingly opinionated. You dispatch messengers by horse and by runner. They wear bells on their ankles so people know a royal decree is coming, and so no one can accuse them of sneaking up during nap time. And speaking of sneaking, there are spies, of course. You don't call them that. You call them royal observers, or truth gatherers, or, in one famously absurd case, camel traffic auditors. Their job? Find disloyalty. Report whispers. Count weapons. And if someone is plotting rebellion, maybe knock over a few cooking pots on their way out, just to send a message. But ruling isn't all paranoia and paperwork. You spend your afternoons listening to music, or being read to old Persian poems, new Arabic treatises, half-baked local epics where the hero always wins just because he says, "I believe in myself." You have a taste for drama. You also have a growing interest in theology. Islam isn't new in Mali, but under you, it's becoming more central. Mosques start rising in major cities. Scholars come to Niani to teach law, astronomy, and medicine. You promote the building of Quranic schools. Not everyone loves this. In the more rural areas, older traditions still thrive, spirits, ancestor rituals, and dances that go on long enough to make your knees ache just hearing about them. Historians still argue whether your religious devotion was spiritual, strategic, or both. You are a true believer. But you're also a man who understands image, and Islam connects you to the larger Muslim world. Cairo, Mecca, Baghdad. These cities don't just offer faith, they offer influence, legitimacy, and cultural prestige. You build relationships with traders from across North Africa. They bring more than just cloth and spices. They bring news. You hear tales of the Black Death creeping across Europe, of Mongol Khans dying in battle, of a city called Venice, where the water is inside the streets. You assume they're exaggerating. You also hear that some people still think Mali is a myth. Just a whisper beyond the dunes. A place where men drink gold and dance with lions. You lean back in your chair, pop a roasted locust into your mouth, surprisingly crunchy, and think, good. Let them wonder. In your spare time, and yes, even legendary rulers have spare time, you begin sketching plans for architectural projects. You're no architect, but you do have taste. You want mosques that reflect both local tradition and Islamic sophistication. You consult with artisans, travelers, and that one guy who insists everything should have at least one arch. You nod, pretending to understand load-bearing walls. And then there's your court. A living, breathing organism of nobility, advisors, guests, and hanger-ons. One man swears he's your third cousin twice removed, and every week he brings you a slightly different version of his family tree, as if you won't notice he added another line. Another noblewoman gifts you a giraffe, alive, and insists it's good luck. The giraffe eats your favorite shrub and poops in the fish pond. You're not convinced. But through it all, you're building something. Not just buildings or armies. You're building identity. You begin to gather stories about your lineage. Your grandfather was Sundiata Keita, the Lion King of Mali. A warrior who supposedly turned himself into mist during battle. You love that one. Another tale claims he could speak to crocodiles. Less useful in the courtroom, but fun at parties. You don't bother correcting the myths. In fact, you might add a few of your own. You are the Gold King, the Earth Tamer, the Sultan of the Sun River. And your next step will make the world remember. Because across the Sahara, beyond Egypt, past the holy city of Medina, lies Mecca, the heart of Islam. And if you're going to do this pilgrimage, you're going to do it loud. Gold doesn't whisper, it clinks. That's the first thing you notice as you descend into the mines of Bambuk and Bure. The air is hot, thick with the smell of earth and human effort. Miners, covered in red dust and determination, move like ants in a maze of tunnels carved by hand and hope. Here, gold is not a treasure. It's a job, a religion, a curse, depending on who you ask. You step carefully through the mine's shaded entrance, a royal entourage at your back. You're not here to pose for a tapestry. You want to see the veins yourself. Touch the walls. Understand where Mali's heart truly beats. And it beats in gold. It's in the riverbanks too, where whole families pan for flakes with methods so ancient even the trees forget their origin. Women crouch in knee-high water, shaking wooden trays, murmuring songs older than the empire. Children scoop mud with tiny hands, their eyes sharp and eager. The gold sparkles in the silt like fireflies caught in daylight. Gold is Mali's muscle. It oils the trade routes, lines the market stalls, and scents the air in your palaces. You sleep under gold-threaded sheets. You eat with gold spoons. You sign treaties with gold-stamped seals. And yet, the deeper you go into these mines, the more you feel it. Gold doesn't make things simple. It makes them shimmer and then shatter. You speak with foremen, scarred, no-nonsense men who've seen tunnels collapse and greed rot friendships. They tell you about theft, corruption, spirits. Yes, spirits. There are tales of glowing snakes that guard underground chambers, of invisible hands that snatch tools from workers, of entire veins that vanish overnight. You raise an eyebrow. They nod solemnly. You pretend to believe them. Sort of. Still, you don't dismiss the danger. Mines cave in. Workers suffocate. The empire's wealth is carved from the bones of its bravest. You make a mental note, improve safety. Or at least improve the idea of safety. Back at your camp, you sit by a fire and look at your hands. They smell faintly of metal. Somewhere in your robes is a pouch of raw gold nuggets, given to you by a miner whose grin was more gaps than teeth. You think of all the nobles in your court who flash gold like it's rainwater, never once seeing the sweat it takes to dig it up. You know better now. But gold doesn't just come from the mines. It comes from trade. And Mali, under your command, is becoming a marketplace no map can contain. Caravans slither through the Sahel like nomadic cities. Camels groan under loads of salt, ivory, textiles, and, of course, gold. The sound of a caravan arriving at Niani is unmistakable, a low chorus of bells, hooves, and the occasional argument about whose turn it is to carry the dates. You control the trade routes by controlling the rivers. The Niger is your silent ally, ferrying goods and gossip between cities. Your scouts monitor the roads. Your soldiers guard the borders. Bandits learn quickly that stealing from the Gold King is a shortcut to public regret. But trade isn't all muscle. It's also theater. You hold court with foreign merchants, Berbers, Arabs, even the occasional oddball from the Byzantine fringe, welcoming them with carpets, musicians, and mango juice so sweet it should be illegal. They bow. They gawk. They leave with gifts and a new story about the king who bathes in gold. You don't, by the way. It's bad for the skin. But you don't correct them. Because you know something now, perception is currency. You build that currency with care. Word begins to spread. There's a ruler in the south, Mansa Musa, who controls rivers of gold and armies of ghosts. Who treats pilgrims like royalty and rivals like mosquitoes. Who is planning a pilgrimage that might just wake the world. Your court is buzzing with it. You've ordered tailors to begin sewing. Tent makers to start stretching leather. You commission new saddles, new banners, and enough water containers to make the Nile jealous. The lists are longer than a crocodile's patience. Your treasurer looks pale. Your advisors blink a lot. You smile politely and say, double it. Because this won't just be a pilgrimage. It will be a declaration. A spectacle so grand that the echoes will reach Cairo, Mecca, even the dusty libraries of Europe. You will walk in the footsteps of the prophet, and do it wearing gold sandals with 50,000 witnesses. Historians still argue whether your preparations were faith or ego in motion. Maybe both. But one thing is clear, you don't plan like a pilgrim. You plan like a conqueror. You begin selecting your company. Not just nobles, but soldiers, poets, translators, cooks, blacksmiths, and holy men. You'll need them all. And don't forget the animals, dozens of camels, hundreds of horses, possibly a giraffe or two just to keep people guessing. You hold a royal ceremony to announce your departure. The drums thunder. The crowd roars. Someone in the back faints. You give a speech full of piety and purpose, peppered with just enough poetry to make the griots grin. And then, as night falls over Niani, you walk the length of your caravan, flicking a bit of gold dust into the fire. It crackles blue, briefly, as if the desert gods are listening. You don't sleep that night. You lie awake, staring at the stars, wondering how many of them will still be visible by the time you return. Because once you cross that first dune, there is no turning back. The day starts with drums. Always drums. Not the dainty, ceremonial kind, but the deep, chest-rattling thump of war drums echoing across the savannah like distant thunder. You ride out at dawn, flanked by horsemen whose armor glints with brass, their spears upright like sunbeams. Somewhere behind you, the cooks are arguing over how much millet is too much millet, and the royal scribes are already sweating through their tunics. But this isn't a war party. Not exactly. It's diplomacy with a side of dominance. You're expanding Mali, not with reckless bloodshed, but with a smile, a gift basket, and, if necessary, a very convincing display of force. You head south today, toward the smaller kingdoms nestled near the forest's edge. These are not desert people. Their warriors don't ride camels. They melt into greenery, speak in tones wrapped in metaphor, and have kings who prefer dancing masks to gold crowns. You arrive not as an invader, but as an opportunity. A walking gold deposit with charisma. You enter the first village to a chorus of flutes and ululations. The local ruler, he calls himself a rain chief, greets you in full ceremonial garb, complete with feathers, bells, and a staff topped with a carved monkey. His people watch carefully. They've heard stories about you. Stories that involve rivers turning gold, cities rising overnight, and enemies turning into fish. You bow low, your gold-threaded robes catching the light just right. Then you present your gifts, salt, cloth, and enough gold to make a lesser ruler weep. You praise their customs. You taste their yam stew, surprisingly spicy. And then, softly, you make the offer, allegiance to Mali. Trade protection. Access to scholars. Religious advisors. Cultural exchange. Optional taxation, emphasis on optional, though everyone knows what that really means. It works. You've turned conquest into a traveling performance. Kingdom after kingdom joins Mali, their rulers gifted fine robes and honorary titles, their sons sent to Niani to learn statecraft and politics. It's the oldest trick in the book. If you can't beat them, marry into them, outgift them, or make them think resistance is deeply unfashionable. Not every ruler agrees, of course. Some dig in. One war chief sends back your emissary with a chicken and a poem about how the leopard does not dine with the donkey. Which is admittedly clever. You send a detachment of 300 cavalry and a poet of your own, whose rhymes are less symbolic and more threatening. By the time you're done, the chief has a new feathered robe and a much less aggressive poem etched into his palace wall. Your armies don't just fight, they build. When towns are added to your empire, you leave behind more than just tax collectors. You fund local mosques, dig wells, plant trees. You tell the people that Mali is not a machine, it's a family. Of course, it's a family where you get to be the overachieving eldest sibling who always gets the best camel. But still. And while your soldiers march outward, your spies travel inward. You receive reports on which governors grow lazy, which judges take bribes, which merchants are underreporting their gold weights. You even hear about a wandering preacher who insists that gold is the devil's toenail. You have him invited to court for chat. He changes his mind. But it's not all muscle and manipulation. You genuinely enjoy the road. The slow unfolding of Mali's corners. the way dialects shift with the trees. The recipes that change from roasted lamb to grilled river fish. You sleep under stars no map dares name. You learn proverbs from elders. One wise woman tells you, even the sun can be humbled by a cloud. You nod, thinking, but not by much. Meanwhile, back in Niani, the gossip mill spins like a gourd in flood season. Who will govern in your absence? Who gets to command the troops? Who misplaced the royal falcon again? The palace buzzes with tension, but you planned for this. You left trusted ministers in place, each one balanced against another like a very polite game of mutual sabotage. If one tries to grab power, the others will pull him down like crabs in a basket. Still, your focus is the frontier. You arrive at Gao, a great city on the Niger's bend, and meet with the Songhai people. Strong, proud, slightly suspicious. You don't try to annex them. Not yet. Instead, you build a grand mosque there. You leave behind a respected scholar. You offer scholarships to Songhai youth to study in your growing university in Timbuktu. It's the long game. They don't bend now, but they will remember. Historians still argue whether your expansion was a golden age or just gold-plated imperialism. But the numbers don't lie. Under your rule, Mali stretches to nearly half the size of Europe, its borders touching the Atlantic Ocean, the Sahara, and the lush forests of the south. Your caravans travel further. Your flags fly higher. Your name is sung in more tongues than ever before. You return to Niani exhausted, sun-darkened, but triumphant. Your palace smells like jasmine and fresh bread. Your courtiers rush to greet you, each one pretending they totally didn't panic while you were gone. You smile. Let them breathe. Let them believe it's over. Because deep in your tent, the plans for your Hajj still shimmer like moonlight on a silver bowl. You're going to Mecca, yes. But not just to pray. You're going to shake the world. You've conquered kingdoms with charm and crushed rebellions with coin. You've expanded an empire, brokered peace with yam-eating forest kings, and built mosques in towns that never even knew what Friday prayers were. But now, you turn your gaze east, not to conquer, not to impress, well, not just to impress, but to kneel. You're going to Mecca. But you don't travel light. You're not just one pilgrim among many. You are Mansa Musa, Lord of the Mines, Gold King of Mali, and possibly the world's most extravagant overpacker. This isn't a religious trip. It's a full-blown, glitter-drenched, continent-shaking event. First come the camels. You personally select 80 of them to carry gold, not just bars or coins, but dust, carefully weighed into sacks so absurdly large they need special straps to keep the animals from tipping over. Each camel gets its own handler. And a name. One of them is called Sir Stumbles, which becomes prophetic, unfortunately, outside Ghat. Then come the people. You don't really count them, but others do, somewhere between 60,000 to 100,000 humans. Soldiers, servants, scholars, griots, cooks, cupbearers, musicians, translators, tailors, theologians, and at least 3 poets whose only job is to write glowing verses about how magnificent your beard looks after desert travel. Spoiler, it's magnificent. The whole journey will take months, maybe years, but you prepare for every step. You commission special tents embroidered with gold thread. You pack enough food to cater an army: dates, honey, roasted goat, rice wrapped in banana leaves, and fermented milk in clay jars. You carry your own royal kitchen, complete with bronze stoves and backup chefs. Just in case. And then there's the security detail. Thousands of guards in fine robes with curved swords and sharp eyes. If anyone so much as breathes on the gold sacks, they'll be explaining their life choices to the ancestors. As you depart Niani, crowds line the road, tossing petals and praise, chanting songs about your wisdom, your wealth, and the time you supposedly tamed a lion with nothing but a glance. You smile. You wave. And as your caravan snakes eastward, it becomes a moving myth, part pilgrimage, part parade, part portable palace. The Sahara greets you with its usual charm: blistering heat, biting winds, and a relentless desire to turn your eyelids into sandpaper. Your men wrap their faces in indigo cloth, your camels grunt in protest, and your physicians go through their entire inventory of aloe in 3 days. But you press on, across to Gaza with its surreal salt mines, past oases where water tastes like copper, through valleys where the stars feel close enough to touch. And everywhere you go, you leave a trail of astonishment. You tip musicians with solid gold coins. You buy entire markets just to gift the goods to nearby villages. You give robes to imams, camels to poets, and gold to anyone who asks nicely. In Wallata, an old man weeps after you give him a pouch of nuggets worth more than his entire neighborhood. In Takeda, you overpay for copper just because you like the merchant's turban. Generosity isn't a policy, it's your brand. But it's in Cairo that things truly get out of hand. When you arrive, the Egyptian court doesn't know what hit them. They expect a king. What they get is a phenomenon. You're dressed in flowing robes of white cotton embroidered with golden thread. You sit beneath a silk canopy, flanked by gold-tipped spears and musicians playing instruments Cairo's never heard before. Your camels clink with jewelry. Your servants shine. You've brought so much gold into the city that the market panics. Prices wobble. Merchants gasp. Local currency devalues. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether it was 10%, 25%, or more. But you devalue Egypt's economy just by shopping. You meet with the Sultan's officials, greet scholars, donate to every mosque you pass, and casually fund entire neighborhoods. You even flood Cairo's gold market so badly that it takes over a decade for the economy to stabilize. Oops. One local historian writes that you blinded all eyes with his wealth. Another writes that you were so generous, people feared he was trying to buy the sun. You're not, though if it were for sale, you'd definitely make an offer. It's here in Cairo you encounter scholars who question your motives. Is this really a humble journey to Mecca, they ask? Or a royal roadshow with extra glitter? You answer, politely, that you're merely fulfilling your religious duty. With style. And let's be fair, You do pray daily. You attend Friday services, quote the Quran fluently, and show deep respect to religious leaders. But you also like your cushions fluffed just so, your coffee brewed precisely, and your robes to match the morning light. You are, in every sense, the golden contradiction, humble in faith, outrageous in delivery. By the time you leave Cairo, the city is buzzing. Children imitate your caravan in the streets. Merchants daydream of Malian trade. And everyone wants to know, who is this king from the edge of the world? You don't stay long. Mecca still awaits. You cross the Sinai, enduring harsh deserts and rock-strewn passes. Your feet ache. Your camels grumble. A few officials suggest you reduce the caravan size. You nod sympathetically, and add 10 more camels instead. And when, at last, you see the Kaaba, that ancient cube of divine gravity, you dismount. Your entourage falls silent. No gold. No song. No royal speech. Just you. A man. A pilgrim. A believer. You kneel. You press your forehead to the earth. And for a moment, Mali fades. There's no gold here. No throne. No legend. Just dust. Stone. And the beating of your heart. You linger in Mecca longer than most kings would dare. Most rulers drop in like royal tourists, pray, pose, and depart before their robes gather dust. But you settle into the sacred rhythm. You study. You listen. You let the heat of the holy city soak into your skin. And it changes you. Not in the dramatic, tearful, renounce the throne kind of way. No, this isn't a Netflix redemption arc. But it shifts something inside. You walk the same streets the prophet did, hear sermons that echo across centuries, and debate theology with scholars who use words like eschatological without blinking. You start spending more time with jurists than jewelers. More time in study halls than banquet tents. You even swap your gold-threaded robe, for one day, for a plain white ihram, just like every other pilgrim. The court poet nearly faints. But don't worry. You still host feasts. Because every Friday, without fail, you invite a stream of pilgrims, imams, teachers, orphans, merchants, and that one blind storyteller who insists your camel winked at him. You pay for their food, serve them dates stuffed with honeyed almonds, and debate the best interpretations of Shafi'i law between courses. And you ask questions. Lots of them. About law, governance, architecture, trade, irrigation, astronomy, prayer, everything. You're not just worshipping, you're recruiting. Because while everyone else thinks this is your peak, you know better. This journey isn't just about spiritual growth. It's a talent hunt. You're building an empire. And you're going to need brains to match all that gold. You offer scholars generous stipends to return with you to Mali, judges, engineers, clerics, even a few architects who can sketch minarets in the margins of napkins. Some say no, but many say yes. Mali, after all, has gold. And now it has vision. Historians still argue whether this was the moment your court began to transform from royal playground to intellectual hub, but they agree that when you left Mecca, you didn't just carry memories. You carried plans. You begin your return trek with less fanfare, but more purpose. By now, word of your pilgrimage has spread across the Islamic world. Caravans whisper of the African king with rivers of gold. Cairo merchants still curse you for wrecking their exchange rates. In Damascus, artists try to paint your likeness based on wildly conflicting descriptions. Some show you with 6 arms pouring coins from urns. One has you floating on a golden camel like some sort of divine inflatable. You let them wonder. On your way back, you take a different route, stopping in Timbuktu, where you pause longer than planned. The town is bustling, dusty, scholarly, and slightly chaotic. You like it? You really like it. So you begin sketching something big. Because while Niani is your capital, you want a crown jewel. A center of learning. A place so radiant with books and knowledge that it draws pilgrims of a different kind, thinkers, translators, visionaries. You're going to turn Timbuktu into a city of paper gold. You consult with architects brought from Cairo and Andalusia. You import bricks from the Niger's banks, palm wood from the forests, and plans from your dreams. You fund the construction of mosques, not just for prayer, but for scholarship. Most notably, the Jingareba Mosque, which, rumor has it, you fund with enough gold dust to build a second one if it ever rains too hard. And alongside the mosques, you found madrasas, schools for theology, mathematics, law, and poetry. You import books by the crate. Scribes begin copying texts in Arabic, Mande, and Songhai. You pay them well, especially if their calligraphy makes you weep slightly from the beauty. Books become currency. Manuscripts, status symbols. Your court starts keeping a librarian on payroll, possibly history's most smugly satisfied civil servant. But the return journey isn't all joy and architecture. In Gao, one of your guards tries to sell fake gold nuggets to a Berber merchant. You punish him, but gently. In Wallata, 2 of your scribes get into a heated argument over the proper plural of caliphate. It's still unresolved. Scholars continue to debate it. Loudly. You also begin facing harder questions from your own court. Why are you bringing all these outsiders into Mali? Why are we spending gold on books instead of horses? Why do the architects keep asking for triangular domes, which are not even a thing? You listen. You nod. And then you quietly do it all anyway. Because you're not building for now. You're building for forever. When you finally arrive back in Niani, the whole empire feels different. You've become more than a king. You're a bridge between desert and city, gold and scripture, past and possibility. And your people sense it. You resume governance like nothing happened, but everyone knows something has. Your royal court, once purely ceremonial, now brims with scholars and jurists. You commission new administrative buildings. You standardize coinage, making sure even the smallest merchant feels the weight of your reforms. You even introduce a taxation system so smooth, people thank you for it. Well, most of them. And then, one dusty afternoon, you stroll into your treasury and casually declare, "Let's build the greatest library the Sahel has ever seen." Your scribe drops his quill. Your gold master coughs audibly. You just smile. Because this was never just a pilgrimage. It was a blueprint. And you're only getting started. You sit in your palace, surrounded by the dull murmur of peacocks strutting across mosaic floors and bureaucrats mumbling about tax ledgers. The palace air smells faintly of sandalwood and ink, your scent of choice since Mecca, and you're nursing a cup of bitter tamarind tea, pretending it doesn't taste like punishment. Why? Because your mind isn't in Niani anymore. It's racing across spreadsheets of the soul. You're thinking of Timbuktu again. Of libraries not yet built. Of laws not yet passed. Of scholars not yet born who'll someday argue about the year you introduced fixed gold weights to market stalls. Spoiler, they'll still get it wrong. You begin what historians now call your administrative renaissance. Though at the time, it mostly looks like you waving at clerks with papyrus scrolls and saying things like, "More decimal points, please." First order of business. Standardization. Mali's market system is vast, stretched across dozens of ethnic groups, languages, and currencies that range from cowrie shells to awkwardly shaped iron nuggets. You decide to streamline it all. No more guesswork about what a goat is worth in gold dust. You commission official weights, scales, and exchange rates, carved into stone tablets and read aloud in public markets like royal bedtime stories. You also institute Zakt collection, charity tax, technically, but your version is more organized, less optional, and tracked by officials with truly exquisite handwriting. It's a spiritual duty, yes, but also your clever way of redistributing wealth without sparking rebellion. Historians still argue whether your reforms were more about faith or function. Whether you truly sought divine order or just wanted people to stop cheating on pepper prices. Probably both. You're a walking duality, one sandal in heaven, the other planted firmly in market economics. And you start gathering data. Yes, medieval, pre-Excel spreadsheet data. You order your scribes to record population figures, rainfall patterns, trade routes, road repairs, birth counts, and goat thefts. Some towns report so accurately that you reward them with extra salt shipments. Others, well, let's just say their mayors find their offices mysteriously relocated to training outposts. And then, your crown jewel, the Bureau of Scholars. No, it doesn't wear little caps or float around like wise butterflies. It's a real department, a council of theologians, jurists, translators, poets, and architects, all paid by the state to think big thoughts and correct your grammar in royal decrees. They draft legal codes. They review land disputes. They argue endlessly about lunar calendars. You love them. Meanwhile, Timbuktu continues its metamorphosis. You send architects back and forth like glittery pigeons, instructing them to make it breathe wisdom and no more domes shaped like onions, please. New mosques sprout like literary mushrooms. Madrasas expand into bustling lecture halls. The manuscript copying industry explodes. In fact, there are so many scribes now that a black market economy springs up for rare inks. Somewhere in a dusty side street, a teenage girl invents a method for speed-drying parchment using heated ostrich feathers. Her name is lost to history. But her technique, still used today by 3 manuscript nerds and a suspiciously efficient chicken. Not everyone loves the changes, of course. Traditionalist nobles grumble about the influx of foreign scholars. Some merchants resent the new tax codes. A few warriors scoff at your obsession with paper over iron. But they can't argue with the results. Trade booms. Markets grow. Justice feels slightly less random. And Mali begins to hum with the quiet rhythm of organization. You even build a system of rest houses and food stations along major trade roads, ensuring that travelers, merchants, and camel herders alike can rest and refuel. One particularly brilliant innovation: free tea and lentil stew on Fridays. Your approval ratings skyrocket. And then there's your passion project, the Timbuktu Library Registry. You task your scribes with cataloging every single manuscript in the city. Not just the Qur'an and legal texts, but poetry, astronomy, medicine, dream interpretations, even cookbooks. Yes, one scholar writes a 200-page guide to the perfect date pudding. You fund it personally. Word spreads fast. Soon, students from across the Sahara begin arriving in Timbuktu. Not to trade. Not to pray. To study. They come from Cairo, Fez, Tunis, even Andalusia. They ride dusty camels and bring gifts, scrolls, questions, arguments. Timbuktu becomes a beacon. And you? You become something rarer than a rich king. You become respected. There's even a rumor, half true, probably, that when the Sultan of Morocco hears your name, he mutters something about that gold scholar from the south and pours another drink. Jealousy, they say, is a fine compliment. But you don't let it go to your head. You continue overseeing roads, laws, markets, mosques, books, and bake sales with the same calm dedication. You host debates in your courtyard, comparing Andalusian legal theory to Malian clan law. You even commission maps, huge ones, chronicling everything from mountain ranges to the relative friendliness of border towns. And all the while, the empire breathes deeper. Not louder. Not flashier. Just smarter. Because it's no longer built on gold alone. It's built on knowledge. So here you are, no longer just a pilgrim or a builder or a gold-flinging tourist. You've become a curator of civilization. And the ink is still wet on the pages you're writing. The desert wind carries whispers, and those whispers carry questions. They ask, can an empire really think? Because Mali, your Mali, has started to do just that. Its courtyards murmur with ideas, its mosques pulse with verse and law, and even the markets are filled not only with saffron and cola nuts but with conversations about lunar eclipses and irrigation. You've built something strange for its time, an empire with a library fetish and a surprisingly efficient public service structure. But now comes your next obsession, connection. If knowledge is the soul, then roads are the arteries, and yours are clogged with sand, potholes, and bandits who sincerely believe ambushes are a form of economic policy. You take it personally. So, what do? You commission roadwork like it's going out of style. 1,000 kilometers of trade arteries begin to emerge, hardened dirt paths, river docks, caravan stops. You line major routes with shelters, wells, and granaries. At certain stations, travelers find benches, date trees, and government-employed old women who can cook a lentil stew so good it's been mistaken for spiritual enlightenment. You also build watchtowers, not just for defense, but for signal fires and general intimidation. Each tower becomes a lighthouse of sorts across the sands, letting merchants know they're still within the care and tax jurisdiction of your empire. And for extra credit, you assign patrols. Armed men on horseback, part traffic police, part roving librarians, ensuring safe passage and enforcing your caravan toll system. Because even in a golden age, someone's got to remind people that customs fees are not optional. The result? Mali's trade network becomes one of the slickest on the continent. Salt heads south. Gold heads north. Ivory, copper, shea butter, iron, and silk slide back and forth across your empire like chess pieces guided by invisible fingers. Merchants begin scheduling their entire lives around Mali's trade rhythm. Timbuktu becomes not just a port of learning, but a literal port, despite being very far from the sea. But your real innovation isn't economic. It's linguistic. You commission interpreters, fluent in Arabic, Soninke, Mandinka, Tuareg, Fulani, Wolof, and half a dozen dialects too niche for even the scholars to agree on. These interpreters don't just help travelers, they act as cultural liaisons. When a dispute arises between a camel merchant from Gao and a jewelry dealer from Gen, it's not settled with swords. It's settled with interpretation. This makes Mali weirdly cosmopolitan. On some days, your capital sounds like a confused parrot. At prayer time, there might be 5 versions of "God is great" echoing through the streets, each in a different language, each equally sincere, and each sung over the aroma of 7 different kinds of rice. But there are challenges, too. Some villages resist the new roads, calling them imperial strings, meant to bind them to your sandal. Others try to bypass the tolls by inventing ridiculous trade routes that involve 5 unnecessary river crossings and at least 1 unfortunate camel drowning. You respond by increasing incentives, free sacks of salt for compliant towns, extra grain shipments, and the rare honor of hosting imperial scholars for tea and public compliments. And here's where it gets juicy. Because with roads come rumors. The tale of your Hajj, now warped by campfire gossip, spreads like wildfire. Some say you turned a desert into gold. Others claim you gifted the Kaaba a solid gold roof. A few whisper you ride a giraffe trained in mathematics. You absolutely don't. But you absolutely let the rumor spread. Why? Because myth is a political tool. So, you lean into it. You instruct artists to paint more idealized versions of your pilgrimage, with extra camels, extra gold, and slightly fewer heat strokes. You even approve a tapestry where your face glows like a sunrise, modesty is nice, but statecraft is nicer. Historians still argue whether you encouraged these myths directly or just failed to correct them. Either way, the world starts to see Mali not as a distant trade stop, but as a mystical powerhouse where books and bullion collide. And you make sure to feed the illusion. You welcome foreign envoys with peacock parades, full orchestras of talking drums, and poets who recite sonnets praising the diplomat's shoes. You gift scholars rare manuscripts wrapped in silk. You offer salt traders diplomatic titles like Keeper of the Caravan Dust. And it works. Diplomatic ties blossom. Agreements are signed. Neighboring rulers start sending their sons to study in Timbuktu, not just for education, but for prestige. You turn diplomacy into an export. And yet, despite all the public sparkle, you remain privately focused. Late at night, you pore over maps, murmuring about desert routes and camel breeding zones. You obsess over river dredging projects and whether the new ferry docks in Segu should have guardrails. You even hold late-night consultations with astrologers, not because you believe in planetary alignments, though Mars did seem cranky last month, but because they often double as weather predictors. You're trying to time a new harvest schedule across 4 climate zones, and you'll take any edge you can get. Then one day, you do something that surprises even yourself. You write a poem. It's not very good. It rhymes sand with hand 6 times, and a frustrated calligrapher accidentally copies the title upside down. But it's real and personal. And for the first time in years, you're reminded that you're not just a king or a ledger-reading bureaucrat. You're a human. With thoughts. With fears. With the sneaking suspicion that someday all of this might disappear like a caravan into a sandstorm. But for now, you keep building. You keep connecting. Because empires crumble, gold fades, and even libraries burn. But the roads you carve, into land, into law, into thought, those might just outlive you. At least, if the camels behave. It begins with a book. A brittle, sun-bleached manuscript passed between trembling fingers in a clay-walled school, somewhere between a mosque and a millet vendor. The title's been half-smudged by sweat and overeager students. Still, it pulses with something unmistakable, thought. This is Timbuktu now. Not just a city. Not just a crossroads. It's an idea, a beacon of curiosity wrapped in mud brick and spiced with sandalwood ink. You've turned it into the intellectual furnace of your empire, and possibly the entire Islamic West. You never meant to become a patron of paper. But here you are, financing scribes and scholars, commissioning libraries, and sending camel messengers to Cairo, Fez, and Mecca with a shopping list of musty titles. You want it all: astronomy, jurisprudence, herbal medicine, ethics, translations of Greek philosophy, and a few poems that probably qualify as academic fan fiction. If it's been written down, copied, or just whispered by a half-blind scholar in a dark hallway, you want a copy. And Mali delivers. By now, scholars travel to your cities the way pilgrims travel to shrines, with dust on their robes and hope in their eyes. They sleep in scholars' quarters, debate in tea houses, and sometimes forget to eat because they've found a particularly spicy passage in a 300-year-old astronomy text. This is your golden ink age. And it's not just Timbuktu. Cities like Jen and Gao grow into academic cousins, each with their own flavor. Jen leans mystical, obsessed with Sufi poetry and dream interpretation. Gao goes practical, cataloging water levels and mapping termite migration patterns. Even smaller towns start building madrasas, libraries, and little book-stalls wedged between sandal markets. It's charming. It's a little chaotic. And it's very, very effective. Your scholars begin forming schools of thought unique to Mali, blending Islamic jurisprudence with local customs, oral traditions, and an alarming love of footnotes. Some texts cite griots, river spirits, and occasionally, advice from a market goat who was believed to be blessed with wisdom before being turned into stew. You let it slide. But here's the real flex: book copying becomes a legitimate career path. Families specialize in it. Sons learn from fathers, who learned from uncles, who learned from that one guy who once saw a real Baghdad manuscript and never stopped talking about it. The scribes work with handmade paper, ink from boiled acacia pods, and nerves of steel. Because one mistake, and boom, you've accidentally attributed a medical text to a theologian, or worse, claimed that camels can fly under divine instruction. They cannot. Not even on Fridays. By now, Timbuktu has hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, many of them older than your great-grandmother's memory of her grandmother's favorite curse. They're stacked in libraries, in mosques, in private homes protected by charms and sheer superstition. And you? You keep adding more. You invite scholars to your court, asking obscure questions just to watch them sweat. You demand opinions on grammar reform, river gods, and whether or not Aristotle would have enjoyed mangoes. Historians still argue whether these sessions were for your amusement or genuine inquiry. You even create something rare for your time: academic endowments. You fund scholars to stay in Mali, to write, to argue, to get paid for thinking. You've invented tenure, with a side of fried plantains. Of course, not everyone's impressed. Some clerics mutter about too much secular blurring. A few desert mystics claim you've turned the pursuit of knowledge into a popularity contest. And yes, occasionally, a scholar defects to Cairo after declaring that your empire smells too much like roasted fish. You don't hold grudges. Much. You do, however, send your agents to copy the defector's last known manuscript before it leaves the empire. Because even betrayal has its footnotes. And your personal library? Oh, it's a stunner. Vaulted ceilings, cedar shelves, scroll cases, glass-covered QANS, and a marble bust of a giraffe that may or may not be anatomically accurate. You like to pace through it in the quiet hours before dawn, running your fingers over the spines. Some of them you've read. Some you pretend to have read. Some are there purely for show, like your 5-volume series on Byzantine hat etiquette. Still, you love them all. You believe that a leader should be surrounded not only by gold but by thought. That a page can carry power more precise than a sword. that the real test of an empire isn't how loud it roars, but how gently it whispers to the minds of the curious. And so, your bookish empire grows. A trade caravan arrives bearing a rare Persian treatise on irrigation. A child in Jen writes her first poem in Arabic and recites it beside the river. An old griot sings the genealogy of kings, then jots it down for the first time, just in case his voice gives out. This is the heartbeat of Mali now. Not just gold. Not just camels. Ideas. And even as you age, your beard flecked with white, your joints predicting the rain, you remain addicted to the scent of ink, the promise of unread pages, and the quiet thrill of knowing your empire thinks. You may be a king. But Mali? Mali has become a university. Somewhere between the gold dust and the ink stains, between the camel bells and Quranic recitations, you begin to hear it. A faint whisper. A rustle. Not from the wind across the savannah, but from within your court, whispers of doubt. Your fingers tighten on your ivory armrest. It's not mutiny. It's not rebellion. Not yet. But something subtler, slipperier, succession. You, Mansa Musa, the gold king of Mali, are growing old. And unfortunately, no amount of wisdom, books, or silk-lined turbans can stop that creeping, uninvited decay. Your joints mutter grievances each morning. Your breath runs shorter after ceremonial parades. Even your laughter, once thunderous and irreverent, now sounds like it's trying not to hurt. You've built an empire. A pilgrimage route. A scholar's sanctuary. You flung Mali's name across oceans and deserts. But now, you're faced with the most delicate task of all, choosing who comes next. Your sons. Oh, you have plenty. And that's the problem. There's Marga, your eldest. Diplomatic, patient, not likely to break the empire within a week. But also, how to say this politely, he lacks your spark. He's competent. You've never caught him whispering poetry to a tortoise or trying to translate star maps by firelight. He prefers spreadsheets. Well, their 14th century equivalent, tally scrolls. Then there's Suleiman. Charismatic, clever, a little too clever. He'd charm a snake, by its venom, and resell it as perfume. You respect him, but trust? That's another scroll entirely. Historians still argue whether you leaned heavily toward Marga or merely sighed and gave up trying to pick. Truthfully, you considered none of them ready. So you begin a different kind of campaign. You test them, not in battles or feasts, but in diplomatic riddles. You assign emissaries to make impossible demands. You invite hostile merchants just to see how your sons handle negotiations. You even send one of them to oversee a sandstorm recovery in a minor province, just to test his grit. He cried. You did not hold it against him, but you definitely didn't forget. Meanwhile, your court grows restless. The nobles want certainty. The scholars want continuity. The merchants want to know if their taxes will increase under the next Mansa. You, though? You want a little more time. So, like all kings who aren't quite ready to hand over the scepter, you cling to legacy building. You commission your final grand mosque, this one bigger, stranger, bolder. It includes an entire wing just for metaphysical debates and a courtyard planted with shade trees imported from some mysterious island no one can quite locate on a map. You double the size of your paper import contracts. You add another shelf to your personal library. You hold court with traveling mystics, asking whether the stars suggest a long or short road ahead. One tells you that your time will stretch like butter on hot millet bread. Another says nothing, just lights incense and walks away. You like him better? Still, time doesn't bend forever. And one day, during a rain-heavy Harmattan wind, your hand trembles as you raise your scepter. Not dramatically. Not enough for the scribes to record. But you feel it, and so does Marga. So, you start preparing the court for what everyone already suspects, that your son, Marga, will inherit the throne. Some of your advisors breathe easier. Others quietly sharpen their metaphorical daggers, or literal ones, depending on their mood. You advise Marga gently, wisely, with a look that says, "Don't ruin this." You don't want to micromanage his reign, but you definitely include a 37-point scroll of advice. He pretends to read it. You pretend not to notice. And here's the thing, Marga isn't you. He's not grand. He's not poetic. But he's steady. And sometimes, an empire doesn't need fireworks. Sometimes it needs someone who checks the floodplains, balances the trade routes, and keeps the camel taxes reasonable. You host one last council, where you publicly praise him, not effusively, but enough. Your griots record the moment with extra flourishes. Your scribes exaggerate the applause. A ceremonial lion yawns on cue. All very regal. And as Marga bows, the court bows too. Succession has begun. Not with war. Not with assassinations. But with a sigh. Of course, historians still argue whether you officially abdicated or just sort of stopped showing up to things. Some say you retired to a quiet estate near Niani, where the mangoes tasted like peace and the courtiers left you alone. Others believe you simply faded into ceremony, still visible, still revered, but no longer ruling. And others whisper, softly, as if the wind might carry it too far, that you never stepped down at all. That Marga was king in name only, while you pulled the strings from behind the curtain, sipping tea and rereading treatises on the ethics of taxation. You don't answer them, of course. You're too busy arranging your next library acquisition. Or perhaps, by now, you're walking slower, breathing deeper, and letting the empire carry on under newer hands. You've done your part. You've glowed. You've guided. You've gilded. And now? Now you begin to let go. But not entirely. Because the thing about legacy, especially in an empire of paper and gold, is that it's hard to retire when your face is stamped on everything from coins to bedtime songs. You're still there. In the architecture. In the scrolls. In the way Marga pauses before passing judgment, remembering how you used to tap your fingers when thinking. You've handed off the throne. But the throne still remembers you. And Mali, however it changes, still whispers your name. You are no longer Mansa Musa the ruler. You are Mansa Musa the memory, the symbol, the old lion lounging in the sun while the cubs test their roars. But don't worry, you haven't wandered off into irrelevance just yet. You still matter. A lot. Especially to the foreign diplomats who still nervously offer you tributes, just in case you're still secretly pulling levers behind the silk-draped curtain. / you don't correct them. Marga might be sitting on the throne, but it's you the traders ask about when they arrive at the gates of Niani. It's your name they etch into their travel logs, your face they attempt to sketch in dusty journals, often with noses too pointy or eyes far too brooding. You don't resemble a tragic poet. You resemble a man who once bought a giraffe for the joy of watching it gallop. But behind all this semi-retirement glamour, a new preoccupation creeps in. How will you be remembered? Sure, the mosques and the madrasas still sing your legacy. But will they last? Will they crumble under future incompetence? Will someone forget to oil the camel saddles of power and let the empire rot? You start to document. Obsessively. You hire scribes, not just one or two, but a platoon of them. They record everything, your decisions, your dreams, even that one oddly vivid nightmare about gold melting into sand while a snake recited poetry. Historians still debate what that dream meant. Some say it symbolized fear of inflation. Others say it just meant you ate too much honeydew that night. You also send out artists. Not just to paint your portrait, but to capture Mali, its rivers, its markets, its scholars lounging beneath baobab trees. You want future generations to see the wealth, not just hear about it. And the libraries? Oh, they're thriving. Timbuktu has become something else entirely. Not just a bookish little town, but a cosmic node, humming with knowledge. Paper flows in from Egypt, from Andalusia, even from the Sultanate of Delhi. Manuscripts cover topics you didn't even know existed: astronomy, pharmacology, architecture, irrigation engineering, and extremely complicated philosophical rants about the existence of time. You don't read all of them. No one does. But you fund their copying anyway. Because ideas matter. And because you want Mali to become not just the Gold Kingdom, but the Mind Kingdom. The scholars of Timbuktu now travel with an odd aura of celebrity. They're invited to distant courts. Their writings inspire debates in corners of the Islamic world that couldn't point out Mali on a map 10 years ago. You hear rumors that a prince in Yemen tried to memorize a Malian treatise on ethics and passed out from philosophical exhaustion. Back in Niani, your court has softened. Not weakened, just matured. The rivalry among your sons has dulled. A few have taken up provincial governorships. One has turned to poetry. One disappears on a vague voyage eastward that may or may not involve pirates. You receive updates, mostly calm. You no longer feel the need to intervene. You're not chasing power anymore, you're curating memory. There's also a new project, a bit strange, a bit personal. You call it the Archive of Echoes. It's a chamber in one of your mosques, carefully guarded, where only select scribes are allowed to enter. Its purpose? to record conversations. Not in a creepy, spying way, but to capture the rhythms of daily life, a merchant haggling over cinnamon, a child reciting his first surah, an elder recounting her youth during the Great Pilgrimage. You want Mali remembered not just for its kings but for its people. Their voices. Their stories. It's a wildly impractical, almost mystical idea. And you love it. Historians still argue whether it ever truly existed or if it was just court gossip taken too seriously. But wouldn't that be the perfect final legacy? A room filled not with gold, but with echoes. Still, not everyone adores you. There are murmurs from across the empire's edges. Some say the taxes grew heavy to support your endless mosques. Some say your gifts to scholars favored urban elites over rural villagers. Some say you cared more for books than bread. You don't dismiss these voices. You invite some of them to your court. You ask them to speak freely. Most are too terrified to say much. But a few do. And you listen. You don't change everything. But you adjust where you can. You decrease caravan tolls. You fund new irrigation wells. You publicly apologize for a grain tax that hurt more than it helped. And in doing so, you do something rare. You begin to shape your legend while still alive. Most rulers are mythologized after death. Their stories twisted by time, polished or poisoned by memory. But you write your story with both hands wide open. You guide your griots, giving them not just your triumphs, but your flaws. You let them record the day you lost your temper and overturned a bowl of dates in front of an ambassador. He still talks about it. You let them tell the tale of when you wept during a Quranic recitation, overwhelmed by the burden of faith. No censorship. No erasure. Just the messy, golden truth. And that's what makes you more than a king. That's what makes you a legend before you're gone. By now, Marga rules fully. You attend his ceremonies, offer polite advice when asked, and retreat when not. Sometimes, you sit in the mosque courtyard, surrounded by students debating grammar or cosmology. They know who you are. Some of them even kneel to greet you. You wave them off. You prefer to be a listener now. There's peace in that. The sun is lower now. Your bones ache louder. Your mind sometimes drifts, into memory, into metaphor. But there's no fear. You've done more than most mortals could imagine. You've turned gold into glory, words into weight, a kingdom into a legacy. And somewhere, not far from here, a librarian gently opens a scroll and begins to read your name aloud. Just for the echo. You lie in bed more often now, not from weakness, not entirely, but from something softer. A kind of fullness. Like a banquet guest who's tasted every dish and finally puts down the spoon. The room is shaded, the clay walls cool, and someone's always tending the incense. You've grown fond of sandalwood. Not because it's exotic. Because it smells like quiet. Outside your chambers, the world continues spinning like a well-oiled wheel. But inside, your mind wanders backward. Not in regret. In reflection. You start remembering small things, moments even your scribes didn't catch. Like the boy who followed your caravan barefoot for 3 days just to glimpse your face. Or the merchant in Cairo who wept as he sold you a ruby ring, not from sadness, but awe. Or the old imam in Timbuktu who once fell asleep mid-sermon and kept lecturing in his dream. You remember laughing, actually laughing, right there in the mosque. Everyone did. Even now, as the empire hums, as your son Marga tightens his grip, you feel something strange, something new. You feel ready. But of course, no one says it. No one says death out loud around you. That's not the Malian way. Instead, they speak in proverbs. The eagle returns to the sun. The gourd must break to free the water. When the drum stops, listen for its echo. You hear them. You smile. Even the court griots soften their rhythms. Their voices fall gentler when they sing your name. Less triumph, more tenderness. You're no longer the lion. You're the shadow the lion casts when the sun sets low. And you begin to give things away. Your personal treasures, things you never listed in royal ledgers, never flaunted in parades. A carved ebony comb from your mother's village. The curved dagger given to you by a Berber chieftain who once challenged your geography knowledge and lost. A leather-bound Quran scribbled with your own marginalia, most of it notes like, too confusing, and ask Imam later. You call in your grandsons, one by one. You ask them questions, test their hearts. You hand them books, amulets, advice laced in jokes. You remind them that gold shines only when polished, and kingdoms only when governed with care. You also prepare your tomb. Yes, you design it yourself. Not a pyramid. Not a marble edifice. A simple structure, domed, earthen, but perfectly aligned to Mecca. Inside, no treasure. Just sand from Niani, a scroll of Quranic verses, and a polished stone inscribed with a prayer. There are whispers about your death long before it comes. Arab chroniclers in Fez record different years, some say 1332, others claim 1337. Historians still argue whether you died during a quiet night in Niani or on some distant journey never officially documented. One particularly poetic theory says you slipped away while listening to a blind griot sing your life story, and that your last words were simply, "Yes, that's how I remember it." Romantic nonsense, probably. But you wouldn't have minded. And so, eventually, it happens. Your breath thins. Your gaze slows. The courtiers lean in, unsure. Marga clutches your hand like a child again. You give him one last look, a look that says, "Don't hoard the gold. Hoard the wisdom." And then, stillness. No thunder. No golden beam of light. Just the silence of a room where something enormous has left. Outside, the people gather. No wailing, just the soft ripple of prayers. Drums don't beat. Instead, flutes play, a melody you heard once as a boy, by a campfire, when your world was still fields and stars. They bury you quietly. No grand procession, no pyramids of wealth stacked beside you. Just sand. Just words. just a name the earth already knows. Mansa Musa. The name echoes across Mali, across Africa, across the world. And then it begins. The legend. You become a character in every desert tale, every West African song. Arab historians exaggerate your pilgrimage until it sounds like you carried gold in the mouths of lions. European mapmakers start placing a golden-crowned black king in the heart of West Africa, your name misspelled but your riches very well emphasized. The Catalan Atlas of 1375 features you prominently, seated on a golden throne, orb of wealth in hand. Scholars will argue for centuries how accurate the depiction is. One calls it imperial propaganda. Another just calls it awesome. Your story spreads faster than a sandstorm. To some, you're a walking bank vault. To others, a philosopher king. To a few, a kind of African Solomon, wise, wealthy, and chosen. And back home? Timbuktu thrives for another century, becoming Africa's Alexandria, where students from all over the Islamic world go to study law, medicine, and the cosmos. Niani continues as Mali's beating heart, at least for a while. The empire persists, then cracks, then fades, as empires do. But your name? It refuses to vanish. It finds its way into lullabies, trading routes, textbooks, even search engine results 600 years later. Modern economists still attempt to adjust your wealth into contemporary terms. 400 billion, says one. No, more like 800 billion, says another. Historians still argue whether it even makes sense to compare. Some say your wealth was exaggerated. Others say that's only because nobody could count high enough. But money, honestly, wasn't the point. You didn't just have gold. You used it to build, to teach, to connect. And long after the gold rusted, the ideas remained. So here you are, gone. And yet, everywhere. Not in marble, not in myth, but in memory. A king who rode to Mecca and made the world stare. A ruler who turned traders into scholars. A man who made wealth mean something. And somewhere in Mali, if you listen closely, you'll still hear it, a griot's voice, rising over the drums, whispering, Mansa Musa, the king who turned dust into legacy. You'd think a story like yours would end cleanly, with a satisfied fade to black, the curtains drawn, and the next act reserved for future kings. But you're not quite done, are you? Because, unfortunately for your heirs, your shoes were never made to be filled. They were golden, metaphorical, and, to be honest, uncomfortably large. Your eldest son, Marga, assumes the throne with all the weight of your shadow pressing down on his back. He doesn't lack ambition or intelligence, but he lacks you, which turns out to be a serious handicap. Still, he tries. He preserves many of your policies, Islamic law, mosque building, and even a decent grip on trade. Timbuktu still shines, Jen still hums, and camel caravans still cross the Sahara, bellies full of salt and minds full of profit. But something's off. The empire's edges begin to fray like an old robe. Vassal states that once bowed quickly now bow slowly, or not at all. Tax collectors come back empty-handed. Desert bandits get bolder. And those flashy gold dust payments that made you famous? They're gone. Turns out, you were the last one with pockets deep enough to tip like that. One scholar from Andalusia even writes that Mali's wealth seemed to retreat with the man himself, as if your death closed some invisible vault no one else could find the key to. And Marga, for all his effort, never makes a pilgrimage. He cites the risk, the cost, the instability, but deep down, everyone knows the real reason. He doesn't want to be compared to your parade. Can't blame him. Historians still argue whether Marga ruled for just 4 years or much longer. The records get patchy. The dust starts winning. And then, like an unlucky dice roll, your empire begins a slow, dignified stumble toward disrepair. By the time your grandson Mansa Suleiman takes the reins, Mali is still mighty, but the horizon is darker. Suleiman is clever, though. Sharp. Paranoid, maybe, but clever. He cuts waste. Builds tighter networks. Suppresses rebellions before they sprout. But something else changes under him, something less visible than taxes or territory. The tone. Gone is your open, generous Mali. In its place, a kingdom that's more guarded, more brittle. The kind that double locks the doors and triple checks the gold vault. You ruled with open arms, they rule with clenched fists. And yet, Mali survives. It's still the largest empire in West Africa, still feared, still respected. But it's also isolated. Hemmed in by rivals. Pressured by growing European interest. Traders arrive less for ideas and more for exploitation. The rhythm changes. And somewhere in the middle of all this shifting sand, your legacy becomes a rumor. European cartographers in Venice and Genoa start sketching your likeness with absurd flourishes. Golden crowns, ruby orbs, scepters the size of palm trees. They label the region Rex Melli or Melli Imperator, the king of gold, but they don't really know who you were. Just that you were rich. Like cartoonishly rich. One French chronicler even jokes that Mali's former king had so much gold, he had to invent new ways to spend it. Which, while flattering, is historically inaccurate. You just liked a good mosque and a well-fed caravan, thank you very much. And while European whispers build you into myth, local memory holds something softer. You're remembered in the Griot songs as the king who turned Mecca golden, as the builder of books, as the Hajj maker whose sandals never cracked. Your pilgrimage becomes a bedtime tale, a fireside legend, and then, inevitably, a benchmark. Future rulers are asked, will you be as wise as Musa? Will your court shine like his? Will your gold feed villages or just decorate your throne? And one by one, those rulers blink. Because no matter how many wars they win or mosques they erect, they can't quite conjure your presence. You didn't just wield power, you wove it. Into gold. Into faith. Into words. And that weaving? That's the hard part. Even centuries later, when the Songhai Empire rises like a phoenix beside your ashes, they copy your model: trade, learning, gold, Hudge. But the spark? Still yours. There's even a whisper that Askia the Great, their most brilliant ruler, studied your reign like a blueprint. He asked about your laws, your caravan routes, your scholarly networks. Tried to rebuild what you once had. He came close. But he wasn't you. Because only once, in the long, dusty scroll of African empires, did all the right elements align: wealth, will, wisdom, timing, and a man willing to spend it all building something bigger than himself. A man like you. And here's the funny thing. For all your riches, all your political savvy, all your international flair, your true empire may have been the stories. The ones your griots still sing. The ones foreign students copy into notebooks in Timbuktu. The ones carved into Arabic manuscripts that now sit in libraries across the world, pages yellowed but names still legible. And one of those names, always, is yours. Mansa Musa, the king who made the world blink, the ruler who spent gold like water and wisdom like firelight. And though the empire may shrink, the river keeps flowing, doesn't it? The Niger still curves its lazy arc through the Sahel. Camels still march stubbornly across the dunes. And every now and then, a child hears your name, tilts their head, and asks, "Wait, who was that again?" And someone smiles. And someone begins to sing. You're not here to see it, but centuries later, long after the last of your bloodline fades into bureaucratic footnotes and disputed chronicles, your shadow refuses to lie down. It stretches across oceans, across calendars, across algorithms. It sneaks its way into the unlikeliest of places: textbooks, rap lyrics, TikTok history reels with dubstep remixes of your name, and university lectures that still begin with, "Now, here's a guy who made the world economy hiccup." But before the memes and the scholarship, before the travel documentaries and flashy infographics titled "Richest People Ever," adjusted for inflation, your memory had to survive the forgetting. Because that's the cruel thing about empires. They vanish. Not in explosions or headlines, but in erosion. A missed harvest here, a corrupt official there. One less caravan this season. A slowly drying well. And suddenly, you're just a former capital with goats grazing between the stones. Timbuktu, your proud intellectual jewel, tries to hold on. The libraries, tucked away in dusty chests and hidden rooms, keep your fire alive. Some are buried during invasions. Others are smuggled across borders. The pages flake and fade, but the words remain. And so do the questions. Because historians, oh, they love a good mystery. And you, my friend, are a deluxe mystery buffet. How much gold did you really give away on that pilgrimage? Did your generosity cause a real economic depression in Egypt, or is that just medieval gossip with good branding? Did your brother actually sail into the Atlantic, trying to prove the world didn't end at the ocean's edge? Historians still argue whether that voyage happened or not. Some say he drowned. Others say he made it to Brazil and inspired later myths of African arrival before Columbus. There's no firm proof, just murmurs, maps with strange annotations, and one haunting possibility: maybe your dynasty reached the New World before it even knew the world was round. And now, deep in the 21st century, you're resurrected once again, but this time, it's not through lineage or territory. It's through pixels. Because some bored teenager, half listening in class, stumbles across your name in a top 10 countdown on YouTube. Top richest people in history, and there you are. Nestled between Augustus Caesar and Rockefeller. The kid scrolls down the comments and sees something odd, people arguing. Not about your wealth, but about your worth. One writes, he didn't invent anything, just had gold. Another fires back, he built Timbuktu, educated the continent, and spread Islam with dignity. Name one other king who turned libraries into international tourist attractions. And just like that, you're being debated again. Like you were at Cairo's court, or in the madrasas of Sankor. You've become currency again, but this time, not in gold. In meaning. Back in Mali, your name is taught in classrooms, yes, but also sung in marketplaces, etched into murals, and proudly worn on t-shirts, Mansa Musa, the real gold standard. Sometimes, tourists arrive hoping to find palaces, treasure chests, gold bricks lying in the dirt. But what they find instead is pride. Locals pointing to the horizon, saying, that was where his caravan passed, or, my grandfather swore our family guarded his mosque. Sure, the ruins are weathered. The mosques have been repaired a dozen times. But the memory? Still radiant. And then, of course, there's the art. Your face, imagined and reimagined, appears in anime-style illustrations, oil paintings, minimalist logos, Afrofuturist sculptures. Sometimes you're regal and stoic. Sometimes fierce. Sometimes smiling, like a man who knows how good his PR team is 700 years later. And in all of them, one thing remains, gold. Not just the metal, but what it symbolized, your ability to turn power into poetry. You weren't rich because you hoarded. You were rich because you shared. You flooded cities with gold but also flooded minds with books. You proved that a king's worth isn't in how long he rules, but how well he travels. And every time someone says, Africa had no great empires, there's a quiet rebuttal in the wind over the Niger. Your story. Still standing. Still glowing. Still golden. The silence that follows your death isn't quiet. It's thunderous. Like a drumbeat that keeps echoing even after the drummer's hands have stilled. You slip out of this world sometime around 1337, though the exact date is a bit murky, some say earlier, others later. Historians still argue whether you passed away on the road returning from Mecca, or peacefully in your palace back in Niani, surrounded by the scent of incense and the slow hum of prayer. Either way, the great Mansa Musa, the man who lit cities with gold and built mosques that pointed toward the stars, has left the building. But your empire, well, it still has a show to run. Your son, Marga, takes the throne. That part's not surprising, you groomed him for this. You didn't just teach him how to hold a sword or count gold, you taught him how to rule with grace, even if his crown always sat a little heavy. He doesn't quite have your flair, your sense of spectacle. No gold-laced parades, no city-crashing pilgrimages. But still, for a while, he holds the line. Mali continues to shimmer. Not blaze like before, but shimmer. Trade flows, scholars debate, pilgrims pass through, and your buildings, those glorious prayer halls and libraries, keep filling with voices. But there's a shift in the wind. You can't pin it to a single moment, but things begin to fray at the edges. A drought here. A rebellion there. The Songhai to the east grow bold. Ambitious. Impatient. And inside the empire, things get familiar. That slow rot of dynasties everywhere, infighting, ambitious cousins, kings who whisper more than they act. One ruler lasts a decade. Another, just a year. Mali, once the golden furnace of the Sahel, begins to cool. You're no longer a living presence. You're a standard. A story. A shadow to measure lesser men by. Which is a beautiful thing, until it becomes a burden. Marga's successors try to conjure your magic. Some claim divine right. Others throw coins at problems, hoping to recreate your generous legend. But the world has moved on. Trade routes shift. Cities rise elsewhere. The sparkle of Mali no longer blinds the world. And yet, what's astonishing is how much of you still lingers. In Timbuktu, even as rulers change, your scholars hold the line. They teach astronomy with hand-drawn charts. They preserve Greek philosophy, Arabic calligraphy, African oral history, all bound in palm leaf manuscripts inked with soot and honey. Some even debate legal theory using verses you sponsored translation for. There's a kind of resistance in that quiet scholarship, in that stubborn insistence that knowledge still matters, even when armies do not. And your mosques? Oh, they live on. The Jingareba Mosque stands tall in the Malian sun, rebuilt and replastered every year by locals with buckets of clay and songs in their throats. It's not just architecture, it's a ritual. A memory kept alive through muscle and mud. Of course, Europe eventually takes notice. Maps begin showing a king holding a gold nugget on the western edge of Africa, his hand outstretched like a myth. That's you. Reduced to a symbol, sure, but also immortalized. You become the go-to example of African wealth, rare praise, even if it's laced with exoticism. By the 1500s, Portuguese sailors are sniffing at your shores, eager to skip the middlemen and grab the gold themselves. Mali, fractured and weakened, can't hold them off forever. Colonial hands stretch toward your legacy with greedy fingers and dusty ledgers. But you stay slippery. Hard to box. Hard to own. Because you didn't just build wealth. You built memory. Even centuries later, griots, those beautiful West African historians with lungs of fire and hearts full of rhythm, still sing your name. They keep you alive through chorus strings and cadence. They remember you not just as rich, but as wise. Just. Thoughtful. Generous. You're remembered for asking questions like, what is wealth, if it doesn't help people breathe easier? What is power, if it doesn't lift others up? And it's those questions that echo the loudest, long after your empire fades. Your story becomes legend, and then, like all great legends, it becomes mirror and myth. People see what they need in you, a symbol of what was, and what could be. Some see hope. Some see warning. But everyone agrees, you mattered. You walked this earth with sand in your sandals and the future in your hands. You shook the world with footsteps dipped in gold dust, but what really stayed behind was the sound of your voice saying, "Build something that lasts." And even now, when historians debate your real net worth or scholars squabble over footnotes in ancient manuscripts, one thing is clear, you're still being talked about. Which is more than most emperors ever get. You're gone, but your legend, well, your legend is just getting started. There's something intoxicating about the idea of an African king so rich he crashed an economy just by showing up. A man who casually handed out gold like it was party confetti. Over time, your story becomes the kind of tale that slips free of historical timelines and dances into folklore. Let's just say, modern memory is a slippery thing. You, Mansa Musa, slowly morph into a symbol. And symbols, oh, they travel well. Across deserts, oceans, and eventually, internet memes. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, your tale journeys the old-fashioned way, through word of mouth. Across the sands, traders and griots keep your memory burning. You become the punchline to exaggerated comparisons. You think that merchant's rich? Phut. Mansa Musa once gave away more gold than that man will ever see. It's the West African version of Bill Gates could buy your house and use it to store bananas. Even in your lifetime, you probably had no idea how far your name would stretch. Maps from 14th century Europe start showing a crowned African king holding a golden nugget, clearly you, stylized like a character in a medieval board game. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, for instance, doesn't just mention you, it features you, like a celebrity cameo in parchment form. There you are, sitting smugly in the kingdom of Mali, gold in hand, as if daring the rest of the world to measure up. Historians still argue whether the cartographers actually knew who you were, or whether you were just a convenient way to sell the idea of rich Africa. But it doesn't really matter. Once your face is inked onto a European map, your myth starts galloping across borders. Fast forward a few centuries, and things get even weirder. You become the go-to name whenever someone wants to prove Africa wasn't primitive before colonialism. You're the trump card. The MIC drop. The poster child for pre-colonial opulence. Textbooks love you. Documentaries name drop you. And then comes the internet. Oh yes. The 21st century is wild. You, Mansa Musa, start trending, no joke, on Twitter. People debate whether you were the richest human in history. Articles pop up titled, "Who was richer, Jeff Bezos or Mansa Musa?" as if that's somehow a useful metric. Spoiler, it's not. You lived in a world without income taxes, stock options, or IPOs. But somehow, even without Wi-Fi, you managed to own more gold than entire countries. Estimates today, based on the value of gold, adjusted for inflation, and seasoned with a hefty sprinkle of guesswork, put your net worth at $400 billion, give or take a few golden bricks. Historians, of course, roll their eyes at this. They still argue whether those numbers are remotely accurate. After all, Mali wasn't a bank account. It was a kingdom of living people. Gold was just one part of your wealth. Influence, education, architecture, those were harder to measure, but just as dazzling. Still, the image sticks, you, on your pilgrimage, trailing camels with gold saddlebags, giving coins to the poor until entire economies collapse under the weight of your generosity. You are wealth personified. The ultimate flex. Pop culture starts sniffing around, too. You make cameo appearances in everything from children's books to video games. Even Marvel Comics tip their hat to you, vaguely, obliquely, but you can feel the echo. Wakanda, anyone? An African kingdom overflowing with wealth, wisdom, and secrecy? Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? And speaking of echoes, remember Timbuktu? Yes, that dusty dream of a city that so many Westerners once thought was fictional. Well, it becomes shorthand for the middle of nowhere, which is a bit insulting considering it used to be the middle of knowledge. But you'd probably chuckle at that. After all, being underestimated was one of your favorite weapons. More seriously, Timbuktu becomes a site of cultural pride. UNESCO protects its manuscripts. Academics visit to study its archives. Tourists snap photos of your mosques, yes, the ones made of mud and miracle, and whisper your name into guidebook pages. Still, not everything about your legacy is reverent. Some folks try to erase you. Colonial records rarely celebrate you. They prefer African history that starts with European arrival, as if the story only matters when white boots hit the sand. You become a ghost in the margins of empire. But you're patient. You wait. And eventually, the world comes back around. Black historians, West African writers, and diasporic scholars begin to reclaim you. They dig you out of footnotes and place you in the center of the story. They remind the world that before the ships, before the chains, there were kings, you, especially, who ruled with wisdom, built with purpose, and dreamed big enough to make deserts bloom. You become a rallying point. A source of pride. A reminder that African greatness didn't begin with colonizers, and it sure didn't end with them. Children hear your name and smile. Teens wear your face on hoodies. Rappers reference you with punchlines. And historians, they still debate the details, your death date, your birthplace, your coin count, but they all agree on one thing: you changed the story. You've been dead for centuries, and yet, somehow, you're more alive than ever. Not in the literal sense, of course. Your bones are long dust. The desert reclaimed your breath a long time ago, and your golden sandals, if you ever wore them, are likely melted down into something disappointingly less regal, like earrings or coins for impatient tourists. But legacies are stubborn. They outwalk camels, outlast dynasties, and ignore borders. And yours? Yours refuses to sit still. Let's talk about how your legacy shaped the lands that once bowed under your rule. After your death, the Mali Empire staggers on, still glorious, but slowly wobbling like a drum left out in the sun. Your son takes the throne, Mansa Musa, but he doesn't quite carry your spark. Competent? Maybe. Charismatic? Meh. Nobody writes plays about him. The gold still flows, the scholars still teach, but the rhythm is off. Historians still argue whether it was internal rot or external pressure that did Mali in. Maybe both. Maybe none. Empires don't fall with a bang. They sag. Erode. Like cliffs eaten by wind, bit by bit. Your successors try to keep the machine running, but without your presence, the empire feels more like a memory taped together. And then come the wolves. New powers rise in the region. The Songhai Empire, in particular, grows bold. While Mali flickers, Songhai burns bright. They seize Timbuktu, gulp down your cities, and claim the crown of West African supremacy. The torch passes, not gracefully, not officially, but undeniably. If you could see it from wherever kings go after death, you might chuckle. After all, you didn't invent Mali from scratch. You inherited it. The wheel turns. But still, it stings. Some of your monuments crumble. Your scholars scatter. The great libraries of Timbuktu. They're raided, rescued, hidden, rediscovered, and nearly destroyed again centuries later. The mosques you built need constant maintenance. Remember, they're made of mud, not marble, and without loving hands, they bake, crack, and collapse. And yet, some still stand. To this day, Jingareba Mosque hosts Friday prayers. Its thick earthen walls are refreshed annually with community hands. That same collective spirit you inspired, it lives on, plastering the past into the present with each smear of mud and prayer. But perhaps your greatest legacy isn't physical at all. It's the idea you planted. The idea that Africa, deep inland, far from Mediterranean shores or European ports, was once home to knowledge, complexity, and astronomical wealth. That Africa wasn't just the continent of enslavement and conquest, but also one of libraries, architects, and, yes, gold-laden pilgrimages. You lit a fire in the cultural memory of a people, and that kind of blaze doesn't go out easily. Fast forward again. It's the 19th and 20th centuries. Colonialists arrive with rifles and flags. Mali becomes part of French West Africa, another line drawn on a European map by people who couldn't pronounce Timbuktu properly if you bribed them with silk and salt. They ignore your legacy. Deliberately. Colonial officers write off Africa's past as dark, empty, and savage. They burn manuscripts, belittle oral traditions, and tell the world nothing important happened here before the French showed up with railways and pith helmets. But in the quiet, griots still sing your name. In whispers and fireside stories, mothers still tell children about the king who gave away so much gold the world ran out of change. That's the power of folklore. It refuses to be colonized. It slips through borders, slides under schools, and tucks itself into lullabies. And when the colonial age finally breaks, Mali re-emerges as a republic, modern, wounded, but free. The new nation grabs hold of your name like a torch in the dark. Schools are named after you. Statues rise in your honor. And on banknotes, there you are again, Mansa Musa, inked in ink instead of gold, but no less regal. The country you once ruled is smaller now, and faces all the modern problems: poverty, politics, occasional coups, environmental woes. But your story remains a source of power, of identity, of pride. Today, across the African diaspora, from Senegal to South Carolina, from Bamako to Brixton, your name resonates like a bell. In hip-hop lyrics and museum exhibits. In tweets and TED Talks. In classrooms where young black students learn that their ancestors weren't just survivors, but builders. Dreamers. Gold bearers. You, Mansa Musa, have become more than a man. You're a symbol of what was possible, and what could be possible again. And that comes with its own challenges. Legends are easy to romanticize. But you were still human. You made choices. Some cruel. Some brilliant. You built your empire on trade routes, but also on hierarchy, taxation, and, yes, even slavery. These truths must sit beside the grandeur. Not to cancel you, but to complete you. You're not a fantasy. You were a king. A real man who woke up tired sometimes, who probably argued with your advisors, who maybe snored. That's what makes your story so soothing, in a strange way. You were flawed, and still, you changed the world. Time to fast forward all the way to the 21st century, where things get weird, pixelated, and fabulously viral. You're trending again. You, Mansa Musa, the Golden King of Mali, are back in the spotlight, and not just in dusty textbooks or sleepy history lectures. No, no. You're blowing up on social media. People are making videos about your wealth, comparing you to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk with thumbnail titles like, "The richest man who ever lived," "You won't believe number 7, and guess what? You're number 1. Still. Even Forbes weighed in. Historians and economists have tried, again and again, to calculate how much gold you actually had. And every time they do, they hit the same roadblock: you were richer than rich. Your fortune is still listed as incalculable on some rankings. That's right. They can't even guess. Your name now lives beside modern titans of industry, but you earned your legend with camels and salt, not rockets and stock markets. There's something refreshing about that. Your wealth wasn't about algorithms or oil fields, but about tangible, shimmering gold, traded in markets that buzzed with the heat of 1,000 tongues. Today, your image is everywhere. You're in video games, graphic novels, documentaries narrated by smooth British accents. You've been mummified, illustrated with sunglasses, holding bars of gold, captioned with lines like "Ball so hard, Cairo crashed." Teenagers who can't find Mali on a map still nod with respect when they hear your name. You, sir, have become a cultural currency. Your name is invoked when people want to talk about black excellence, about forgotten African power, about how history isn't just something that happened to Africa, but something Africa once shaped. And there's power in that. See, your resurrection in popular culture isn't just a quirky footnote. It's part of a broader hunger. People are tired of the one-note narrative. They want heroes with brown skin, with braided hair, with names that sound like thunder and sun. Your story reminds people that Africa wasn't passive. That blackness isn't new to dignity, or majesty, or mind-blowing wealth. That Timbuktu wasn't a joke, it was a library city, glowing with books before Oxford even dreamed of a catalogue. You've become the patron saint of, "We were kings," and while that slogan gets oversimplified, the yearning behind it is very real. But let's pull the curtain back a little more. A curious side effect of your fame today is the push for reclamation. Scholars and activists alike are digging deep into the archives, both literal and oral, trying to find what's left of your empire's treasures. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, for instance, are now the subject of global preservation efforts. Some were smuggled out during times of war, hidden in tin boxes and rice sacks, saved page by page from fire and flood. They're being digitized, translated, loved. Your face has appeared in murals across the world, from Harlem to Johannesburg, painted with gold halos and confident eyes. You've become a kind of North Star for artists, educators, and dreamers, each sketching their own version of who you were and what you meant. Some even want to make a biopic about you. And here comes the debate. Who should play Mansa Musa? Idris Elba? Mahershala Ali? Someone unknown? Should it be gritty and grounded or stylized and mythic? Should it emphasize your Hajj or your governance? Your diplomacy or your decadence? Historians still argue whether such a film can ever be accurate. Whether it should lean into the legend or dig into the dust of real, hard policy. After all, you weren't just a rich guy tossing coins, you were a planner, a taxer, a ruler with laws, borders, and duties. People want you to be a symbol, but they also want the truth. And this is where things get tricky. Because your legacy now has many owners. Mali claims you, of course, but so does the broader African diaspora. Muslims point to your devout pilgrimage. Pan-Africanists embrace your resistance to Eurocentric narratives. Economists use you as a benchmark for unimaginable wealth. Educators use you to rewire young minds. And all of them are a little bit right. And a little bit wrong. You're no longer just Mansa Musa, the man. You're Mansa Musa, the concept. That's the strange price of immortality. You become more than one story. You become a mirror, reflecting what people need to see. But you'd probably enjoy that, wouldn't you? After all, you were never just trying to be remembered. You were trying to shape memory itself. Every gold bar given on the road to Mecca, every mosque you commissioned, every scholar you paid to copy books in Timbuktu, that was you planting seeds in history's soil. You wanted to be known. And now, hundreds of years later, here we are, lying in bed, eyes closed, hearing your tale one more time. Because some stories never stop glowing. And now we're here, the quiet end of your golden road. The caravan stopped. The dust has settled. And you, Mansa Musa, are no longer walking the earth. At least, not in body. Your final days, like so much of your past, slip through the fingers of certainty. Historians still argue whether you died in 1332, or a little earlier, or a little later, because the records blur, the names tangle, and in the Sahel, time moves with the hush of dry wind through millet fields. One moment you're minting coins and dictating letters, and the next, it's your son Mansa Musa who's seated on the throne. Maybe it was a quiet death. Maybe you passed on in a sun-drenched chamber in Niani, your bones at rest beneath a slab of carved stone, while the griots outside hummed your name into their chorus. Maybe it was abrupt, a sickness caught from one of the traders, or a shadow that crept up during prayer. Maybe your last thoughts were of the gold mines, or of Mecca, or of the silence that comes after legacy. Or maybe, just maybe, your story outgrew your body so fast that death was merely paperwork. No grand mausoleum survives, no globe-trotting sarcophagus like Alexander's. What you left behind wasn't in your tomb, it was in your systems, your roots, your culture. Mali didn't collapse the moment you left it. Your son held the crown. Your lineage carried on, even as the empire slowly started to bend under its own weight. That's the way with empires. They swell. They shimmer. They fade. But let's not get too sentimental. You wouldn't. You were a planner, a spender, a builder. You weren't just wandering around tossing coins like a tourist with a grudge against his wallet. You built bureaucracy, appointed governors, managed trade taxes with Arab merchants. You systematized Islamic law into a world previously ruled more by custom than court record. You built more than buildings, you built a model of what an African Islamic empire could look like. And yet, that glittering model, despite its beauty, wasn't indestructible. Timbuktu endured, oh yes, the libraries kept breathing, whispering wisdom, but the center of power shifted. Songhai rose like a shadow in the east, ready to take Mali's place with the same riverborne confidence. By the late 1400s, Timbuktu was under new management. Your lineage had blurred into the past. The gold kept flowing, the scholars kept copying, but your name slipped into stories. Not gone. Just sleeping. Until the modern age woke you up again. Now, across Africa and beyond, your name inspires new kinds of dreaming. Mansa Musa University, yes, that exists. Artists in Lagos and Accra invoke your gold-wrapped image when painting their own futures. In classrooms, teachers finally have a counterweight to the tired, Dark Ages story, because your Mali was anything but dark. And this is your quiet victory, your final triumph. You weren't content to be rich. You insisted on being remembered. On being storied. On setting down so many golden breadcrumbs that one day, when the world was ready, it would find you again. And it has. Every bedtime story like this one, every curious whisper about the richest man ever, every YouTube comment under a history explainer saying, "Why didn't we learn this in school?" That's you, again. Emerging from the dunes. Wearing your gold-threaded robes. Smiling just a little. Because you knew. You knew that power isn't just held in your hand, it's held in other people's minds. So now, let's close the book. Let the caravan rest. Let the mosques echo with their final call tonight. You've walked your Hajj, you've fed the hungry, You've outspent cities and outlived empires. You, Mansa Musa, are no longer walking the earth. But you've never really left it. And now, gentle listener, let your breath settle. The gold is gone, the dust has cleared, and the stars above Mali hang low and warm in the sky. Picture the river, slow, wide, breathing in moonlight. Somewhere near its edge, under the ruins of a palace now faded, the air is still and the earth is rich with memory. Feel it. The weight of a story that outlived stone. The whisper of traders' feet padding across hot sand. The laughter of scholars beneath wooden scroll shelves. The rhythm of a ruler who once shook the world not with war, but with gifts. You've wandered far tonight. From bustling marketplaces in Niani to the glowing domes of Cairo. From salt roads to silk caravans. From old scribes humming in Timbuktu to TikTok teens wondering who the richest man of all time really was. And now you've found him. You've walked the path. You've heard the drums. You've counted the camels and gold bars in your sleepy little head, and still, it wasn't enough to measure the legacy of Mansa Musa. But that's the magic of bedtime stories. They don't end. They echo. So for now, soften your thoughts. Let the Golden King drift back into the sands of your dreams. Let the river carry you somewhere calm. Somewhere wide. Somewhere rich. And if you listen carefully, you might just hear the jangle of coins again. Good night, gold seeker. And may your kingdom, whatever shape it takes, always shine.